Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing something quite a lot different. Something I've never attempted on this channel before. Something that I've always wanted to try and do. And so, here I am. We're going to be attempting an Iceberg video today. And I know icebergs in recent days have fallen off a little bit, but I've always sort of wanted to do one, so I thought, why not? You know, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And it's on a little known video game franchise that I absolutely adore, and people that know me know I absolutely adore it. I've been playing it for almost all my life, and that video game franchise is Ratchet and Clank. Now, as I said before, people that know me know that I absolutely adore this franchise. I've played them countless times over probably about 18 years now, and I will probably continue to play them and love them for the remainder of my life. And you know, I've seen a few icebergs, I've seen a couple main ones that are based around this series, and so I've taken some entries from both of those and a couple of other things, and I've also added my own entries to a few of the tiers, so, you know, there's going to be something here that everyone might enjoy, and even I learned a few things while doing the research for this video, so, you know, it's already been a wild ride, and I've only just started recording it. All I will say before we actually get into this video is, if you are planning on playing these games or are currently playing through them, I may consider giving this video a miss until you have finished doing so, or, you know, have actually done so, mainly because this video is going to contain a lot of spoilers through, you know, a lot of the games, mainly all of them, essentially. So, yeah. Take that as warning. You have been warned, but as I say, if you don't care, if you have played them, or just want to see some cool trivia and facts or whatever, then let's get right into it. This tier is mainly for stuff that most people will know, regardless of if you're a super fan like myself, or whether you've only just had minor brushes with the series, or don't even know anything about it. You know, you're going to at least have seen something in here about the game, if you've seen anything about it, that this tier will most likely cover. So this is very surface level stuff, so if you don't know anything here, then I will quite happily say that I will be very surprised. So yep, without further ado, let's finally get this thing started. The first entry on this iceberg introduces us to both the protagonist and the species to which he is supposedly the final member. We will later learn throughout the series that that is not the case, as in Going Commando we meet Angela Cross, in A Crack in Time we meet Alistair Azimuth, and in Rift Apart we do meet Rivet, but I'm not really counting her, as she is basically an interdimensional counterpart instead of another Lombax. But we are initially introduced to the series and to Ratchet as him being the last member of his species. Due to different regulations between regions, the games are named differently in the US and regions outside the US, such as the EU and Australia. This is only really seen in the PS2 releases as well as one of the PS3 releases, with Ratchet & Clank 2 over here being called Ratchet & Clank Going Commando in the US, Ratchet & Clank 3 being renamed to Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, and Ratchet Deadlocked being renamed to Ratchet Gladiator. And the PS3 title is Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault being renamed to Ratchet & Clank Q-Force. A lot of people are confused as to why Deadlocked was renamed to Gladiator in regions outside of the US, but I personally think it's because they couldn't really have the word dead in the title of a kids game. It wouldn't really be that good of a look, so it's understandable as to why they would change this. You may have noticed that in the first Ratchet & Clank games, specifically the first two, Ratchet shares two different voice actors. In the first game, he was voiced by Mikey Kelly, who was the better voice actor for him in my opinion. This voice actor suited Ratchet's whole bad boy image and the whole selfishness and rogue aspect of him a lot more. But considering the change in direction the story and character took, they replaced Mikey Kelly with James Arnold Taylor, the more favoured voice actor, and while he does suit that role a lot more, I liked Ratchet in the first game because he represented something that was a lot more opposite to Clank, and so the opposing views made for a more interesting narrative. But Mikey Kelly, interestingly enough, was actually brought back 10 years after his departure in 2012's Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault, as he voices the AI on board the Starship Phoenix. Following on from one of the previous entries, the reason as to why the names were changed in regions outside the US is because the titles famously contain a lot of innuendos as subtitles. Some of these include Going Commando, which refers to a person who doesn't wear any underwear. Up Your Arsenal, which is fairly self-explanatory. I always remember my mum telling me off for saying that I wanted the game when I was younger, and little 8-year-old me had absolutely no idea. Size Matters, referring simply to the size of one's hog, and Quest for Booty, which is also fairly self-explanatory, Rift Apart, essentially meaning ripped apart, and so on. This won't be the last time we touch on the names for the games, but I won't go into too much detail here. This entry refers to a cutscene and cheat code in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. Al is shown playing a Quark vidcomic, some of the minigames within the game. He speaks and enters the famous cheat code, which you yourself can actually enter during your play of the Quark vidcomics to yield the same result of Quark being in a tutu. It's a funny little Easter egg which is actually shown to you during a cutscene, which just makes it all the more charming in my opinion.
Aren't you gonna unlock Quark's secret costumes? Here, I'll use the cheat codes. Let's see. Up, up, down, down, left, right, circle, square, square. He's in a tutu!
This entry refers to some of the secret stages found in the earlier Ratchet & Clank games, as well as a crack in time, such as Going Commando, Up Your Arsenal, and obviously a crack in time. The Insomniac Museum features a remade layout of the Insomniac offices, with little gimmick areas which showcase cut features and enemies from the games. It is also a fun area to spend time in after you complete the games to see really what could have been. There is a lot to do in them, and it is definitely worth a look if you haven't done so already. I can promise you won't regret it. There's some pretty funny stuff in there. This entry is referring to the spin-off games made for the PSP and later ported to the PS2, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank. Both games are considered canon, but Secret Agent Clank is considered to be more of in-universe fiction, as Secret Agent Clank is actually a character, a Bond-like character, in which Clank can be seen playing. I wouldn't say you need to play them in order to know what the overarching story is, however. They are just fun little additions for on-the-go gaming. It is shown in a cutscene in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal that the villain, Dr. Nefarious, was originally an organic being before being supposedly killed by Captain Quark and becoming the robot which he is known for being today. He is also shown to be this way in the 2016 Ratchet & Clank reboot, but I do not consider this game to be canon to the series at all. I think this was just a nice little nod to the fact that Nefarious was originally organic. This entry refers to one of the weapons you can find on planet Eudora within the first Ratchet & Clank title. In challenge mode, if you take the alternate path on Eudora and pick up the suck cannon again, then you'll be greeted with the message on screen, "You got the suck cannon, ellipsis, again," being an obvious nod to the fact that you already have this weapon from your first playthrough. This tier will contain slightly more obscure knowledge and things that you may not have realised throughout the games. You may learn maybe a thing or two from this tier, but I'll still mainly be surprised if a lot of players don't already know this. Raritanium is a resource seen throughout the games, being first featured in Going Commando and is seen latest in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. It is not present in every single game between these two, however, but you would think by its name that it is a fairly scarce resource, and you wouldn't be blamed for thinking so. It is called raritanium after all. However, in every game it is featured in, it is an extremely common resource that can be found almost anywhere, meaning that its name is a completely false description of what it is. I'm unsure why they made it so, but it is a cool name, so I think it gets a pass. If you don't know what this entry refers to straight away, then I'm very surprised, because everybody that has played the first game has done this at least once. What it's referring to is essentially, in the first game on planet Rilgar, you meet a lovely lady with some huge personalities who allows you to enter the hoverboard races. What the game doesn't actually tell you, however, is that if you proceed to crouch in front of her and side flip back and forth in front of her, you know, her personalities get much, much bigger. And I'm really not sure as to why Insomniac included this in the final game, but I suppose at the end of the day, it's just devs having a bit of fun. I know for a fact 10-year-old me really used to love this one, and just for the meme nowadays, every time I do a playthrough, I always make sure to do it. Most of you that have played the games will notice some of the more obvious crossovers that Jak and Daxter have had within the Ratchet & Clank universe. In Going Commando, in Clank's suite on Endarko, you can see both Jak and Daxter on the big TV screen in the centre of their apartment. Later in Going Commando, when picking up a gadget part, you can see Clank replicate a move that Daxter performs, leaving Ratchet to facepalm, knowing that he's probably just referenced their sister franchise. You may, however, not know of some of the more obscure crossovers that they did, especially in Ratchet Deadlocked, in which Jak was actually a playable character in split-screen co-op and multiplayer, but only playable by player 2, which is probably why he's more of an unknown sort of crossover within that game. But Ratchet also features in the game Jak X Racing, his Deadlock variant to be precise, and you can unlock him by having a Ratchet Deadlocked save file on your memory card, or, in the PS4 re-release, having a Ratchet & Clank 2016 reboot save file on your system. As previously mentioned, some of the game's subtitles are rude innuendos that cause the games to be renamed in regions outside of the US. The US, however, don't have no regulations. There were some titles that were in fact turned away in favourable for the more family-friendly ones we have today. Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time was originally supposed to be called Ratchet & Clank Clock Blockers. Fucking clock blockers. What were they thinking? Another example of this is Ratchet & Clank All for One, that was supposed to be named, and I can't believe I'm even saying this, Ratchet & Clank Foreplay. I have no idea what they were thinking with that one, honestly. Genuinely, how did they think that was going to get through? High Impact Games, as mentioned earlier, are the developers of some spin-off games for both Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank, that were originally released on the PSP and then later ported over to the PS2, like most sort of first-party PSP games. Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, however, was the closest thing we came to a traditional Ratchet experience for on-the-go gaming. Because it was so similar to its console counterparts, High Impact Games thought it would be cool to try and emulate their version of the Insomniac Museum called the High Impact Games Treehouse, which featured a lot of concept art, cut features. It was a lot more cut down than the Insomniac Museum, as obviously the PSP had a lot more resource limitations, but it was still a cool little addition that I'm glad they included. I recommend going to check it out if you get a moment and you're going to play Size Matters again for whatever reason. It is actually quite a fun look through. The original trilogy of Ratchet & Clank games, as well as Deadlocked, were remastered for both the PS3 and PS Vita in 2012, but contained a plethora of graphical glitches and oddities that are still present to this very day 12 years later. Some of the most notable glitches in these include Ratchet's oxygen meter in Ratchet & Clank 1 being present after he exits a body of water, mainly because it would sit off screen and would be cut off by the 4:3 aspect ratio, but considering it was upscaled to 16:9, that HUD element would remain just on the side, sat there. Another example is Ratchet's helmet being slightly too big for his head in Ratchet & Clank 2 and 3, which would sort of cause him to have his helmet on, but there would be a noticeable gap in between his head and the inside edge of the helmet, which was definitely a strange thing to witness. Probably the most iconic one of this, however, is in Ratchet Deadlocked, in which the first cutscene in which Ratchet actually enters the Dreadzone arena, it zooms into his face, and you can see inside his face, basically, like all the textures glitching out and whatever. It's kind of creepy when you first see it, but once you know the sort of context behind it and the fact that it's been like this for ages, in the end it is just kind of funny. Dan Johnson was an employee and artist at Insomniac Games who unfortunately passed away on December 3rd, 2006 during the development of Size Matters for the PSP. He has had many Easter eggs of himself placed in many of the games, with the only exceptions being Ratchet Deadlocked and Ratchet & Clank going mobile. Some examples of Easter eggs dedicated to him are his face appearing on all the monitors in the Blanc Tactical Research Station in Ratchet 1. His face appears on a snowman in Siberius in Going Commando, also known as Snow Dan, and breaking the snowman gives the player a skill point, aptly named You Can Break a Snow Dan. Similarly, in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, there is another Snow Dan on Quark's hideout, and breaking it also gives you a skill point named Break the Dan. I recommend you going out and finding some of these for yourselves. They can be quite rewarding to find and can net you some extra unlockables or bolts for your journeys across the Solana and Bogon galaxies. The whole overarching plot of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal involves us taking down the big bad villain, Dr. Nefarious. One of the most iconic villains in the entire franchise, and for good reason. His motive in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal is changing as many people, like the entire Solana galaxy, from squishies, as he calls them, into robots, just like himself. This is all because he views organic specimens as a lower life form to himself. And when you really stop to think about that, that is incredibly racist. The fact he calls them squishies as well, it's essentially like a slur. Yeah, it's sort of weird, because, I mean, you look at someone wanting to... this is going to be a really awful comparison, but I can't think of any other one, but, like, Hitler. He wanted to reduce an entire population of people because he saw them as lesser beings and himself as, like, the supreme race. And sort of having that is a very, very, very racist outlook, obviously. So the logic behind that and Nefarious's motives sort of just add together to the fact that he is a massive, massive racist. Made taking him down a million times more satisfying, in my opinion. You may have noticed throughout your foray into the worlds of Ratchet & Clank that they seem very akin to the capitalistic society we see ourselves in the real world. This is because the PS2 games especially are meant to emulate a capitalist satire. You'll notice how massive businesses, I mean, the sort of villainistic corporation in the second game is literally called Megacorp. How more on the nose can you get? Businesses like that are always trying to sell things to you at an exorbitant price, or people that you save from mortal peril, you know, won't help you unless you slide them some side cash from your secret hard-earned stash. Wow, that was a fucking sick rhyme. I'm unsure why they went this way for narrative reasons, but I suppose it allows the player to, you know, easily progress if they've, you know, got some cash or something. sorts of set as a marker for progression. I don't really know, but it did make things a lot more entertaining at points, I will admit.
Now, let's get the goods on that experiment. What the?
I think I see the problem.
What? Now even the computers are charging us? That's it. This galaxy blows.
I bet some of you didn't know that in the main menu for Ratchet & Clank 3, you can hold L1, R1, L2 and R2 at the same time to access a demo for a small little indie game called Sly Cooper. It was something I accidentally discovered once, and now I make it a habit to do every time I start a new playthrough of Up Your Arsenal. I've still never actually played a proper Sly Cooper game to this day, which I realise is pretty much sacrilege in some communities and is a crucifiable offence, but I mean, nah, it's fine, I'll get around to it. In the story of Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time, after the Alistair Azimuth boss fight, he shoots Ratchet with a bolt of electricity, or plasma or whatever it is, from his weird double-ended wrench thing, which is actually really fucking cool now that I think about it. This, combined with the fact that he sort of stumbles back weakened and falls off the Great Clock into whatever abyss that holds, is, you know, presumably what actually kills him. Despite what Clank has been told about time travel being completely irresponsible, he goes back in time anyway to save his good old furry friend. It actually shocked me the first time I saw him die, no pun intended, but it did always make me wonder how we can take so many rockets, bullets and other projectiles from any enemy in the universe, but one singular bolt of electricity, that's what ends him. This is where we finally delve below the surface of the iceberg. This is where stuff starts to get a little bit more obscure. We'll probably go over some aspects that you may not have known about the development of the game, the inspiration of the games, and certain creation and ideas, as well as some things that might have been used to break the games in certain ways. Stuff like that. But strap in, ladies and gentlemen, as it's time to enter the depths. This entry refers to some scenes in the 2016 remake, when the plumber seems to have some form of omnipotence and says certain things that pertain to him knowing he's within a video game. When he finishes fixing up your ship after you complete Planet Navalis, he turns to the pair and says, "See you in the next reboot." This obviously means he knows he's in a remake and knows that there will be another remake because they didn't do the original game any justice whatsoever. If you couldn't tell, I'm not the hugest fan of the 2016 remake. Yeah, I still got the Platinum Trophy. I'm a weird guy, what can I say? The Revolverator is a famous instance of cut content from the series, being the first known weapon cut from the first game. It was a weapon that supposedly allowed Ratchet to spin enemies above his head, but was cut from the game due to the fact that it would have left Ratchet very vulnerable while it was in use, and also cut due to the fact that the PS2 had limited resources and it couldn't really handle that. It did, however, make it into the final game as something a construction worker on planet Hoven was seen using, allowing you to partially interact with it. I find it cool that despite it not being a weapon in the game, they still included it, although it was probably because they wouldn't have to bother making models for the tools, now that I think about it. In games in which the decoy glove and or the mini turret glove appear, there is a way you can potentially use them to push Ratchet through certain walls to access hidden areas or skip certain areas altogether. This is used a lot in speedruns of the game to skip certain lengthy areas, and can also be used for some money making glitches which we will touch upon a little bit later. There is a secret cheat code that can be used within the Up Your Arsenal pause menu that goes as circle, square, up, down, left, left. The game should resume automatically and your wrench will be turned into a purple double-sided lightsaber, which is insane. Like, how cool is that? No idea as to why they decided to include this is fairly random, but I'm sure as hell glad they did, because purple's my favourite colour, first and foremost. Having a lightsaber as a melee weapon is cool, especially when you donk a Tyrannoid on the head with it. But it also does kind of make sense, as I believe it uses the same models as the lightsabers the ninjas use later throughout the game. So, if the model's already there, you might as well do something fun with it, you know. But I can admit, it does make me feel a lot more badass having that equipped instead of the regular wrench. Going back to the decoy glove and mini turret glove glitches, if you use your decoy glove at a specific point near the back of the room where you start the hoverboard race in Rilgar, you can actually put yourself through the wall. From here, if you carefully navigate some of the unseen level geometry, you can access a place that you would only be able to access during the hoverboard race, the track. Now, if you go all the way around the track, because it'll spawn you back if you go backwards, you can find a massive wall of bolts that you see throughout the track, and you can usually jump through them after you go off a ramp. Now, if you stand under these with the taunter equipped and have it continuously firing, it can spawn an infinite stream of bolts, which is insanely overpowered. I don't think I need to tell anyone. It takes ages for you to actually get anywhere with it. I'm pretty sure it takes about 3 hours to get 100,000 bolts, and so, I mean, it's something that I would sometimes leave on overnight with an elastic band strapped to my PS3 controller, or, you know, it'd be something I would sit and hold while doing something else. But, you know, it really made the 150k Rhino bolt grind a hell of a lot easier, and is something I use on most of my subsequent playthroughs of the game now. In the first Ratchet Clank game, as well as the 2016 remake, there is a certain planet called Kalibo 3, and one of its main standout features is a massive ocean that surrounds anywhere on the planet. The second hoverboard racetrack can actually be seen underneath this ocean, and the water is magically reduced to be under the track when you initiate the second race in the first game. This, however, was slightly rectified in the 2016 remake, with you being able to drain the ocean with basically a Stanley Cup. The Hydro Displacer draining that level of water is just mental to me. But at least they added a reason as to why the water magically reduced, so you know what, I would never usually do this, but well done 2016 remake, good job. Right, I know this is going to look off because, you know, it might look different again, a bit like one later in the video, but obviously you'll get to that. I forgot to film this one. I have since edited the video, somehow didn't notice, rendered the video, which has taken me about a day, and so I'm now having to go back and redo that, and I hope it's not going to be a pain in the arse again, but you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to fucking do this once and for all. In Going Commando, the main plot point throughout the game is sort of recovering the Protopet for Megacorp, after it is stolen by a thief who later becomes known to us as another remaining Lombax, Angela Cross, who we referenced earlier. She plays a pretty, big part in this game, and it's strange to see that in Ratchet Clank 3 onwards, she is never actually referenced and believed to be retconned, until one throwaway line in a radio station in A Crack in Time that references the fact that she is a female Lombax because she doesn't have a tail. I'm unsure why they sort of just left Angela Cross out for the most part. I mean, she played a very big part, and it was a clear clue that Ratchet wasn't actually the lone surviving member of the Lombaxes, which is a major plot point, definitely throughout the future series, so maybe then I can see why they retconned her, but the fact that they referenced her means she definitely exists, so I don't really know.
Tonight's top story, new information on the disappearance of Lombax rebel Angela Cross.
I'm sorry, have we confirmed that Angela Cross is in fact a Lombax? I know that was the assumption, but she doesn't have a tail.
Female Lombaxes don't have tails, Kip. In fact, this just in, lots of females do not share the same anatomical traits as their male counterparts.
Oh, I see. Well, hence the set of horns sprouting on that dome of yours. Hey, Pepper.
After the infamous Snivelak boss fight, if you know you know how shit it is, a cutscene is shown where Ratchet briefly forgets to rescue Angela. After being reminded that she was in fact incarcerated within the robot, he then shoots her out of the containment with the upgraded Lancer weapon, regardless of whether you have actually upgraded it in the game or not. They basically just assume at this point that you have it upgraded at this point, as it's one of the first weapons you get in the game, and Snivelac is very close to the end, so fair enough. But in the rare case you haven't upgraded it or didn't use it, you would just have this new weapon in a cutscene, which I thought was quite an interesting detail, how they would just sort of leave that in. Dr. Nefarious regularly has moments throughout the games in which he briefly glitches, for want of a better term, and during this sequence he completely freezes and his brain plays snippets from an in-universe soap-like show which stars two very prominent characters that go by Lance and Janice. These small segments are quite memorable among fans, as it serves as comic relief from the sometimes intense cutscenes Dr. Nefarious can provide. They also include funny situations and lines that really make you question what sort of show it is. In Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, Charles Martinet, the famous voice actor of Mario and Luigi himself, plays a prominent character throughout the story known as Orvus. Because of the shared voice actor, Insomniac definitely sort of leans into the Mario-based jokes, and one of the most iconic ones in the game is when the plumber, haha, says to Clank, "Plumbers don't just go diving down strange pipes," which is a very obvious nod to the fact that Mario, who is a plumber, who indeed goes diving down strange pipes quite regularly. And I thought it was a cool little reference when I first saw it, and it definitely made me smile when I first heard it. But I guess it's just another reason as to why A Crack in Time is the GOAT of the future series.
Plumbers don't just go diving down strange pipes all willy-nilly. That'd be ridiculous.
This entry refers to the first-person wrench glitch that can be formed in challenge mode in Going Commando. After completing the game for the first time, you gain access to an extras menu, to which a first-person mode setting is added to that menu. Once activated, it will obviously put you into a first-person-like experience. I can clearly tell that it was just something they added to the side in the extras menu, because it's not really the greatest thing to play, considering the whole game is built around being a third-person experience. But there is a very prominent glitch in this mode that a lot of speedrunners make use of. That glitch basically entails you enabling the mode, walking up to a wall, doesn't matter how steep the wall is, can be literally a 90-degree wall, a flat wall, and if you rapidly throw your wrench at it and walk into it, you will just scale the wall, for some unknown reason why. You can clearly tell the mode was an afterthought at this point. It can be fun to basically just go anywhere, especially places you were never meant to see, and you can see a lot of glitches, unused areas and geometry. And, you know, it's cool because it is extremely easy to pull off and do. My Blaster Runs Hot is an arcade game that can be played in Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, and getting a score of 10,000 nets you a PlayStation trophy by the name of My Blaster Runs Really Really Hot, which I thought was a neat little joke. The game is based off of the in-universe movie by the same name, in which Captain Quark plays the main protagonist. This movie and arcade game is also referenced in the 2016 remake when running through Al's workshop on planet Kerwan. This is where we start to get to the more proper obscure stuff now. A lot of this will also be hypothetical from this point on, so a lot of theories and little inconsistencies or details that possibly add more to the lore. I think you're bound to definitely learn some stuff from here on out. I won't spend too long in this entry, as the way we acquired this information is through the Insomniac data leak which occurred last year, which revealed and leaked many years of hard work by hard-working individuals. But this entry basically states that in the leaks, the next Ratchet & Clank game is set to release in 2029, which will be the longest wait we've had for another installment in the series since the original game released in 2002. I'm more than happy to wait, however, if it means it gives them more time to perfect it and make it as good as possible. So, only 5 more years to go, lads. Not to be confused with Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus, which has really nothing to do with the overall concept of this game other than sharing a name. Ratchet & Clank Nexus was supposedly meant to be released in 2006, and was a follow-up to Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, which took place on a single planet in which Ratchet and Clank would both be caught up in a war between 2 alien factions. The story would sort of evolve over time, with Ratchet and Clank beginning to have differing and opposing views about these factions, and would have trouble deciding which side to fight for, which I think would have been a very, very interesting concept. This game was, however, later reworked into Deadlocked, and some elements of gameplay and narrative might remain from the early concept of Nexus. It would be nice to see a game like this, however. I think it would pose an interesting story and dilemma, but could possibly be a bit too heavy for the childlike audiences that this game series is really based for, and for the sort of people that just want to shoot funny aliens with bright colours. Regardless, it is still nice to see this game as documented, as otherwise the idea would have just been lost media to us. Ratchet & Clank had 2 mobile games, with a third planned, but never came to fruition. One of these was called Ratchet & Clank Going Mobile, which was a 2D side-scroller released shortly after Deadlocked in 2005. This game was regarded so highly among the people that had played it that it actually won the Best Action Game Award at the 3rd Annual Mobile Entertainment Awards. The game would have seen the pair transported into a mobile device and working with Al to try and restore them to normality, possibly alluding to the fact to try and immerse the player more, considering the platform it was on, which I think is quite a neat way to go. A sequel was actually planned for this game, called Ratchet & Clank Clone Home, which was cancelled in mid-2006. General consensus states that it may have been cancelled due to the plot being fairly similar to Size Matters, but also focus group testing, I believe, saw that the game didn't really hold up the standards that Going Mobile originally had. The other mobile game that was released, and that I have actually played, was called Ratchet & Clank Before the Nexus, which was released on app stores in 2013 for more modern devices, obviously, and was a simple temple run or Subway Surfers like clone in which you were on a lot of grind rails for a lot of the game, but one of the cool mechanics of it is that you could actually hook up your PSN account to the game and transfer Raritanium from in Before the Nexus to the proper game into the Nexus, which I thought was a really neat little way of connecting the 2 games. It is extremely hard to play this game, however, though, because it was taken off app stores ages ago and doesn't run on newer hardware, considering the game is limited to a 32-bit architecture. If anyone knows of a way to play this game, however, then please let me know. It'd be nice to relive the days, even just for a little bit. A lot of people think Rivet from Rift Apart is actually trans. Their reasoning for this is fairly sound, as in A Crack in Time, a radio broadcast states that female Lombaxes do not have tails when referencing Angela Cross. Rivet, of course, as seen, has a tail, so it caused a lot of people to think that she is in fact trans. It has not been confirmed as far as I'm aware, and it could possibly just be because she is from an alternate universe and is a counterpart of Ratchet, so needs to be as similar as possible. I suppose if that's the way you want to believe it, then you're more than entitled to that view. I, however, don't really care either way. She's a good character in a good game. That's all I really see. If you're unsure as to what the spherical moons could mean, then in the contexts of the future games that include them, I'll quickly explain. In Ratchet & Clank 2 and 3 primarily, there were several stages in which you are transported to a small moon and the camera follows you around the moon. The Obani moons in Ratchet & Clank 3 and the Thugs for Less jamming array in Ratchet & Clank 2, for example. These sorts of stages were originally meant for Ratchet & Clank 1 also, but I think resources on the PS2 at the time, before they'd learned to optimize it all, weren't really built for that, so they weren't included. I'm not exactly sure. But what I do know is that the big cannon you see on Iridia that goes unused, other than a gold bolt location, would have been meant to send you there. In Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, there is a vehicle known as the Turbo Slider. It was seen in some sections throughout the game, primarily in Tyrannosis, in which the vehicle was used to navigate some of the larger areas that that planet had to offer. But this vehicle was originally meant for sort of hoverboard or hoverbike type races, which were eventually cut due to time constraints, also the fact that the PS2 didn't have the split screen resources to render 2 separate race instances at a time. One of these stages is actually complete, however, and can be played through the Insomniac Museum in Up Your Arsenal, which is quite fun because, you know, it's cool seeing this cut content you can actually play. But if you haven't played it, I'd give it a go. It is actually quite fun to look around and see what could have been. Throughout the series, we see many different races, species, and different types of creature. It seems, however, that only Lombaxes have 5 fingers. I'm unsure as to why that they decided that this was the primary design choice, but I will admit that it is interesting to think about and see how other species and characters differ from Ratchet. This entry refers to other ways in which you could access the Insomniac Museum. I'm unsure about Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, considering how easy it was to unlock the Insomniac Museum in that game, but in Ratchet & Clank Going Commando and in Up Your Arsenal for certain, there were in fact alternate ways in which you could access the Insomniac Museum. In Going Commando, you could intentionally fall off a grind rail in Silver City, find your way out of bounds, and then use your charge boots or whatever to walk over to this building, go through the floor, and find a room, a really sort of poorly textured room, with a few enemies and a teleporter that takes you straight to the Insomniac Museum. In Up Your Arsenal, there is a slightly different method, but it involves you going off the beaten path on planet Kerwan to find a teleporter on a ledge. The teleporter itself will appear to do absolutely nothing unless your system's internal clock is set to exactly 3 AM. Only when those criteria are met, you'll be able to use the teleporter and gain early access to the Insomniac Museum. This entry specifically refers to a poster that is found in Al's workshop in the Ratchet & Clank 2016 remake, as well as the movie, I'm pretty sure. There is a poster scene in which the words Spiro the Space Moose are seen above a creature fitting that description. This is in reference to a series Insomniac previously developed, Spyro the Dragon. Girl with a Stick was the original work-in-progress name for a project that was being developed by Insomniac after the release of Spyro the Dragon 3, and it was supposedly loosely based off the gameplay and setting of The Legend of Zelda, as far as I'm aware. This was then scrapped, as it was considered to be just bad, which I suppose is fair enough, to be honest. The concept was then adjusted and turned into what we now know and love, Ratchet & Clank. This entry refers to a specific cutscene in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, in which Captain Quark is addressing his newly created Q-Force. He begins addressing people by saying,
"Ladies and gentlemen," oh, and Helga.
People have since theorised that Helga is non-binary, since she obviously does not positively respond to conventional gender terms. Again, I don't really care either way. I think it just makes for a funny bit in a cutscene, which is probably exactly what they were going for. This entry is fairly self-explanatory, basically stating that the sequel to Ratchet & Clank 1, Ratchet & Clank 2 Going Commando, was actually greenlit for development 5 months before Ratchet & Clank 1 was finished. I always thought that this was an interesting move. Sony clearly knew that the first game was going to do well if they were that confident in a sequel before the first game even hit store shelves. Now we're getting into the good stuff. As like before, things are going to get more and more obscure from this point. If you've known everything up to this point, then honestly, kudos to you. You're a bigger fan than I am. Anyway, let's head right into Tier 5. The Snow Beast Award actually got its name from the enemy it was based off. If you've played Going Commando before, then you know exactly which enemy I am referring to. Planet Grelbin is infamous among Ratchet & Clank fans as being one of the most bullshit planets to exist in the entire franchise for good reason. The Yetis on this planet are absolutely relentless in their attacks towards Ratchet. They take tons of damage and deal even more of it. Not to mention the numbers they flood you with as well. It is definitely a low point of any playthrough I do on Going Commando nowadays. Like, even still, I find it almost impossible to survive if I don't have at least the plasma coil or the bouncer. Anyway, enough of the Grelbin rant and back to the Snow Beast Award. The award was given to Tony Garcia, the lead developer of this stage, who only had 3 days to develop this entire area. Like, the code for it, obviously. And the time constraints obviously led to the worst stage in the entire game, which netted him this award. The award was then awarded to the Noid missile stations in Up Your Arsenal, as it was the worst thing to ship with that game, and fair enough, those things suck. Still makes you think, though, how bad does something have to be before it's actually praised by the people working on it? The Spyro 2 Gear Grinders are an enemy type in the Hurricos realm and are described as big orange enemies wearing industrial and construction type clothing, wielding a massive monkey wrench. All of this, as well as the fact that they are accompanied by small silver robots, adds up to them being very similar to a specific character we all know and love. It is presumed that these enemies were partial inspiration towards the design of their future games, Ratchet & Clank. This entry isn't nearly as bad as what you're probably thinking with a title like that. In the Insomniac Museum in Up Your Arsenal, there is a weird purpley blue character model, with white and red eyes and an enlarged right fist. It is unknown if this was meant to be an enemy or character within the game, as unlike everything else in the Insomniac Museum, there is no commentary as to what it is, or how it relates to the game. The only thing that this attraction has to offer is a dialogue box with 4 simple words. All hail Mr. Fister. In Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, there was an enemy that was supposed to be a part of the game that was eventually cut. These were described as crate-throwing apes, and were obviously meant to throw bulk crates at the player. These were cut due to the fact that it would have been incredibly difficult to implement these due to the PS2's resources, also especially considering how many times the enemy would appear. It was only a few times on a certain planet, I believe. The finished concept for this enemy can, however, be found in the Insomniac Museum, so we can easily see how it would have functioned during gameplay. Before the release of Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, a competition was held by Insomniac Games for people to submit weapon ideas for use within the next installment of the series. There were 5 finalists overall, which the public got to vote on to appear in the game. One of these finalist contenders was a weapon known as the Spiral of Death, and that eventually became the weapon that was included within Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time. The original concept art provided by its creator Jackson Finley is different from the final product, but Insomniac were as faithful as possible. Good thing this won the competition though, because the Spiral of Death is absolutely goated. This entry refers to the fact that normally the nefarious boss fight at the end of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal has 2 main phases before you fight the final boss, the Bio-Obliterator. If you do enough damage to him, however, in his first phase, you can actually kill him before the second phase starts, and the game recognises that you've gotten his health to 0 and therefore just cuts out the entire second phase. Notorious Ratchet & Clank speedrunner Zem probably has the most famous example of this tactic in practice. During the development of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, the man who developed the hacker puzzles, a man named Mike Stout, wanted to originally make them much more difficult as he felt that they were too easy. This design choice was, however, not implemented, as the target audience for this game, children, would have probably had a much harder time overall completing them. You can actually, however, in fact, get the original intended difficulty. If you hold R1 when you initiate the puzzle, it will override the normal easier difficulty in favour of the original intended difficulty instead. The Groovatron is one of the most iconic weapons or devices in the entire Ratchet & Clank Future quadrilogy. It has the abilities to make enemies within range of it dance to the music it plays while a disco ball floats, and obviously music is played throughout the area of effect. It was originally meant to have the song Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees as the music that would play once it was thrown. The developers for Tools of Destruction actually used this as placeholder music as it fit rather well, but was removed before release due to the fact that it would have cost too much to gain the rights for the song. Also, I am fucking certain, and I will not be told otherwise, that Epic Games stole the idea for the Boogie Bomb from the Ratchet & Clank Groovatron. They are the exact same item. You cannot prove to me otherwise. They are the exact same. This entry is probably referring to the fact that after Ratchet & Clank 1, the bolts in game became much easier to acquire, with higher amounts of bolts being present with every box and every enemy. This meant that it was much more satisfying to acquire them over time, and with the arrival of Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, the bolts were much easier to come by. Once we return to the Solana Galaxy in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, however, the new bolt system is still present, meaning that in just a short amount of time since Ratchet & Clank 1 ended, about 18 months, maybe 2 years or so, what was previously the equivalent of, say, 10,000 bolts has now inflated to the equivalent of about 50 to 75,000 bolts instead. Darla Gratch is repeatedly used as comic relief throughout the series, with her being seen in certain news reports in which the reports are shut off just before she is supposedly killed. Two examples of this are in Ratchet & Clank 1, the info bot for Planet Rilgar shuts off just before she is eaten by an amoeboid. In Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, she is seen on Veldin as the planet is being attacked, and the news report cuts off just before she is supposedly killed by Tyrannoids. A fun little extra to this though. Once all Ratchet & Clank 1 skill points are earned, some fictional in-universe magazine, posters and stuff are available for viewing. One of these is a satire of Reader's Digest called Reader Digested, that details how Darla Gratch fell in love with the amoeboid that ate her on Planet Rilgar. On Planet Tadano, in Going Commando, before the main factory area, where you initially park up your ship, there is a main courtyard full of rockets the player can destroy. In this area also, there is a bus in which infinite robot tourists can be seen getting off and taking a tour around the outside of the facility. Ratchet can repeatedly kill these tourists, however, in any manner he sees fit. A simple bash with the wrench, or maybe you eviscerate them from existence with 4 rounds of the Rhino 2. The original idea for this is that enemies would emerge from the factory to attempt to kill Ratchet in order to deter anyone from attempting a genocide run of this game. But all that really happens in the release version is a help desk lady asks you to stop. There was actually a cut line from this, in which the help desk lady would simply just say, "Please stop." This probably says a lot about me, but I always remember taking a good 20 minutes each time I would first drop onto Dano to murder the tourist robots. Man, I was one fucked up kid, Jesus. Similar to the Quark in a Tutu entry, this one also requires cheat codes in the vidcomic section. In the vidcomic selection screen, pressing square will bring up a menu. Entering _Megan_ and pressing start will start a rudimentary tournament fighter-like game called Pirate vs Ninja. Repeating the same process, but using the code Ying_Su will allow you to play Bombs Away, a rudimentary Bomberman-like game. These codes can be found on the computers within the Insomniac Museum. I always just thought it was really cool that even in the secret endgame content, it still teases even more secret content by giving you clues to follow. The fire boots were a cut weapon from Ratchet & Clank Going Commando that when used would leave a minor trail of fire behind you that would burn enemies that walk through it. Making a circle with the fire would also cause a small explosion that would harm enemies around or within it. It was removed, presumably because it was very impractical to use over literally any other weapon in the game, and was supposedly not very powerful at all. I still think it is odd, however, that this didn't make it in, but the fucking Clank Zapper did. If you have played GC and got the Clank Zapper, you know how much of a waste of bolts that was. Jesus Christ, it was awful. It was the worst weapon in the entire series, I would say, and I will not be told otherwise. We've reached the bottom of the iceberg now. Things here are going to get really obscure or really strange. Some people may be expecting some specific things to be mentioned from here on out. Time to delve even deeper past the bottom of the iceberg. I put this one as far down as I did, mainly because of the connotations of it. It isn't exactly obscure, as it is shown in one of the mandatory cutscenes that plays throughout the game. However, this entry refers to the fact that while in the Zeldrin starport in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, Quark was shown with Scrunch the monkey having a brief argument. It is unknown what Scrunch is saying, but definitely appears to be displeased with something Quark has said or done. Quark retorts by stating the classic line we all know,
It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister?
This line is just absolutely diabolical when I think about it, and I absolutely hate thinking about the logistics of how an absolute unit the size of Quark could congregate, for want of a better word, with a monkey that was a fifth of his size. There's just so much wrong with it, but I don't think the game would be nearly as memorable without it. This entry refers to early versions of Ratchet & Clank 1, in which the Gold Bolt collection animation we know and love today wasn't present. The Gold Bolt would simply fly towards Ratchet as he was standing there doing his idle pose. After hitting him, the game would begin to play the damage animation. It doesn't actually do any damage, and clearly just serves as a placeholder animation until the more permanent one with the flaring character we know and love was finally implemented. Another little fun fact though, the bolt counter shown in early versions of pre-release Ratchet & Clank 1 show a yellow bolt counter with no background instead of the blue one with a lowish opacity black background we have today. Throughout A Crack in Time, Clank is repeatedly told by both Orvis and Sigmund that using the clock for time travel is extremely irresponsible and could destroy the foundation of space-time itself. The whole overarching plot for Ratchet is that he helps Alistair Azimuth find a way to save and return the Lombaxes to their native universe. Alistair sets on using the Great Clock to achieve this goal, but Ratchet disagrees with him, telling him that is not what the clock was built for and that it could irreversibly damage the universe they currently reside in. This is all well and good as a plot point, but earlier in one of the gameplay segments, you use time portals on the Fungoid's home planet to save them from Dr. Nefarious's rule. If this was possible all along, couldn't we go back to the Lombax home planet Fastoon and just do the exact same thing? It was perfectly stable when we did it on the Fungoid's home planet, so it would be perfectly normal for us to go and do that, right? I mean, that makes sense. It just seems a bit contradictory when looking back on it all. A Crack in Time is still a goated game though, despite this clear plot hole. Well worth a play if you haven't done so. This entry is referring to placeholder text that would be seen on some untextured surfaces and models within the game. The phrase simply means that devs would joke around and say that texturing this isn't their job and that they can blame someone else on it instead. This is nowhere near as good as Alan, please add details from Hitman Blood Money, but still a good inside joke among the devs having fun that you can still laugh about. I'm aware that these are not obscure, a bit like the Quark fucked a monkey entry, but a lot of them flew over my head as a child, and going back to replay them as I grew up had me realising some of the ones I missed. Again, the reason it is this far down is due to the connotations of a lot of them. Some of the jokes in this game make zero sense to children, but all the sense in the world to the adults that play. One of my favourite examples is from Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, in which the president of Marcadia and father of Sasha, a clear rip on Bill Clinton might I add, says this funny line with Ratchet's response just being the icing on the cake.
My daughter tells me you're a man who's good with his hands, Ratchet.
Sir, I swear I never...
The city's laser shield.
That scene still makes me smile to this day. There are plenty of other examples, such as Clunk saying bullshit during Quark's funeral in Up Your Arsenal.
Quark's loss is a true tragedy. The man was a hero, brave, honest, kind, and humble to the core.
What a load of bullshit.
Captain Quark may be...
I recommend either playing through for yourself, if you haven't, or searching for yourself and trying to find your own favourite ones. There are some absolute bangers in the game that I haven't mentioned here. I am unsure if this is 100% canon, or whether it is something that the commentators said in order to try and frighten Ratchet, but there is an audio clip in Ratchet Deadlocked, in which one of the two main commentators, Juanita, says that her mother used to serve Lombax's brains for breakfast with eggs and salsa. If this is true, then maybe Lombaxes were hunted for food which was to be eaten by others, which is just a scary concept for, basically, an intelligent species. This entry refers to a line of code that was found within the Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal game files. This line is used when describing a cut Quark vid comic, and the section ends with the words in all caps, "This scene has been cut." I can see why it was possibly cancelled. In the case they were referring to the Q-Force within this line of code, it doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why the vid comics that show his escapades over the years would be showing something that is currently happening within the game. I could be very mistaken, and there might be another reason, or we might not even have a reason entirely. But if you know anything I don't, then please do let me know. I included this entry for two reasons. One, because of the reason it actually deserves to be on the Iceberg, and two, because of a little personal story I have that really paints me out to be a dumb child. Starting with the former, Clank Ratchet was an actual skin that was going to be in Deadlocked co-op and multiplayer, but was cut for obvious reasons, as it is extremely cursed. It's just a hybrid of the two characters, I can't really imagine it. I do believe, however, that this skin was sort of reworked into the Alpha Clank skin we do see in Ratchet Deadlocked. The personal story I have of this, though, is that as a child, I used to think for some stupid reason that Ratchet's name was Clank and Ratchet's surname was Clank, and Clank's surname was Ratchet. I don't know why I had this. I sort of thought it was a bit like akin to the whole Luigi surname being Luigi Mario for some dumbass reason. Like I say, I have no idea why I thought this to be the case, but I had no idea what I was doing as a 6-year-old. I was one dumb child. In Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on planet Savali, there are optional objectives known as LORBs, or Lombax Lore Orbs. What they basically do is tell stories involving other IPs, such as Knack or Horizon Zero Dawn, to name a couple. This is also backed up from the Rhino 8's unique trait of spawning in objects from these worlds. The IPs may not be canon to the original universe, but considering Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a whole multiversal story, they could be canon to the whole multiverse aspect of it. This entry, while I don't think so, could also be referring to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, the Super Smash Bros. Clone starring many different PlayStation IPs and characters from those IPs, such as Dead Space, Metal Gear Solid, and Uncharted, to name a few. That could possibly be a sequel to all the Ratchet & Clank games, where the pair learn to flawlessly utilise the ability to change universes at will, but I highly doubt it, considering it doesn't explain how the others can do so as well. I would safely say that this game is not canon to the Ratchet & Clank storyline whatsoever. This entry refers to the fact that no matter where you go and which galaxy you end up in, there are always just tons of the same crate filled with bolts and other ammunition crates just placed everywhere. No one knows, as far as I'm aware, how this comes to be and who does it. I often wonder if the crates are just pre-placed in areas Ratchet ends up in, or whether they're just everywhere on every planet, including the ones we never see, and it just goes unexplained by the lore. we have finally gone below the iceberg. Very little light makes it this far down, and that reflects just how many people might know about the trivia and other things that are mentioned from here on in. So, let us begin the penultimate tier. This entry is both a joke and isn't. This is a reference to the iceberg of Super Mario 64, in which one of the entries in the Super Mario 64 iceberg is every copy of Super Mario 64 is personalised. Now, the reason this is referenced in so many icebergs is because that specific iceberg of Super Mario 64 was the one that really popularised the sort of iceberg chart genre of video. The reason I also say that this isn't a joke is because the series employs some tactics that a lot of games have used and still use. This isn't just exclusive to Ratchet & Clank. And it's called an adaptive difficulty system. Most of you probably know what this is, but for those of you that don't, I will briefly explain. So, say for instance you're on a specific stage and you're struggling in certain areas or keep dying to the same enemy. They will supply you with more health crates in that area, or perhaps give you more ammo before you enter that area, or maybe make that enemy a little less accurate, or have less health or something. You know, little things that make the game still challenging for you, but also won't make it insurmountable, so you will want to keep playing. Especially for Ratchet & Clank, I know, for instance, in the first game, like, have you noticed that anytime you open an ammo crate, it's either ammo for the weapon you're currently using, or ammo for the weapon you have least ammo in? That, my friends, is the adaptive difficulty in effect. Now, while this is present in every copy of Ratchet & Clank, and every Ratchet & Clank throughout the series, there may be some specific parameters that are unique to your copy of the game, which the game has employed in order to make your experience a bit more personalised. So yes, on some small, minute level, I suppose every copy of Ratchet & Clank is personalised, but not to the extent you might think. Ratchet & Clank Race Through Time was a 2D side-scroller flash game made to promote the release of Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time. It followed Clank through a sort of obstacle course area, which you had to navigate the best of your ability, and on top of all this, the game was on a time limit. You could get access to one of 3 exclusive wallpapers depending on the time you got, and all of these were in 4:3, so that already shows you just how old this game is. It wasn't exactly groundbreaking content, but it was a cool insight to the past of the franchise, and an extra free game in the series, so for that it has garnered a lot of respect amongst fans. This game was actually considered lost media for the longest time until some hardcore Ratchet & Clank fans found the game and restored it a couple of years later, where it is now playable today on the flash game preservation service Project Flashpoint. I am unsure as to whether this is a definitive reference that 100% references the Ratchet & Clank franchise, but the general consensus is that it is in fact a reference, and I also believe so.
Ratchet, how's it going? It's rocking. Take it easy. You're only a genius on Earth.
The whole mix of Tony Stark saying Ratchet to an English-speaking rodent who travels through space and is holding a tool that is half of his size while working on a spaceship sort of all points to a reference of the series. Not to mention that Insomniac made Marvel's Spider-Man, the best-selling Marvel game, a year before this film came out, so it would only seem fitting that the producers of the film would make a small reference to one of Insomniac's previous IPs. About 6 years ago, a video surfaced online of an old 2001 build of Ratchet & Clank, with a jungle area looking environment. A lot of it is very reminiscent of Spyro, from the environment and sound design all the way down to the way Ratchet looks around. It is interesting to see how the game's development went from a more Spyro-oriented experience like Insomniac were used to the unique experience it is today. The jungle stage shown here was also supposedly altered and reimagined into what we now know as Poketaru, and I think it's clear that it was a huge inspiration considering how similar it all looks. Crack in Time has a new planet travel system from the rest of the games that was never seen again, funnily enough, in which you would take off into a simple two-dimensional plane and manually fly around to your next planet. During this sequence, however, there was a lot of optional side content that could be done in these spaces, which would mean you would spend a lot of time in this space area. Because of this, something to break the silence was added to the game, that being several radio stations. A lot of these stations include instrumental songs, which are extremely reminiscent of currently existing songs. I'll show you some examples now so you know what I mean. As you can see, some of these songs are very similar to the songs they are referencing. They could have fully just edited the lyrics out of some of these and used the normal instrumental, considering how similar a couple of these are. Tony Garcia, the man responsible for the Grelbin Yetis and the creation of the Snow Beast Award, was given a task to try and create a new crate for Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. Insomniac believed that they had already done all they could with crates and that new ones wouldn't really fit and would be very hard to implement. So Tony was told that if he could come up with a new crate idea, then he would be rewarded with a case of beer. That is how both the Jackpot and Inferno crates in Ouya were invented.
And Ted caught us having our conversation, trying to brainstorm some new ideas. And we told him, hey Ted, we want to do some new crates. And he says, we've been trying to come up with new crate ideas from the beginning, and I think we've done everything that we can do with crates at this point.
It is impossible to further extend the crate paradigm.
Yeah, that's exactly how he said it too. It was weird that he spoke so formally. But yeah, that's exactly what he said. And I took him up on the challenge, and I said, we're gonna do it. And he says, if you can do it, I will buy you a case of beer. And that was all the motivation I needed to see this through to the bitter, bitter end.
Well, that's pretty remarkable because Ted was not a big fan of drinking at the office.
Oh, he was very much not a fan of drinking in the office.
I wouldn't have included this one if it was just... well, the circumstances behind it were fairly normal, like with every other thing that appears on this cursed website. But all I will say is that the only reason this is on the Iceberg is because of how quickly Rivet R34 art was made after the initial announcement of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. I believe it was less than 30 minutes after Rivet was shown for the first time to the world, there was high quality Rivet Rule 34 art, which is just impressive if I'm honest. It's rare when people would jump on the bandwagon so quickly, yet it was done for this, at this point, basically niche little children's game. It's just funny to me now, but it was at least mildly disturbing back in 2021 when it was revealed. Again, this is another kind of obvious one that is shown to you throughout the game, but only really makes sense once you pay attention to it a little bit, so it's more here for the connotation, hence why it's this far down. Dallas and Juanita are the two commentators for Dreadzone in Ratchet Deadlocked. The banter between these two is absolutely amazing, and I love the way they talk to each other. Like, Dallas clearly has some weird love crush on Juanita, but Juanita has a sort of love-hate relationship with him. Dallas often comes out with plenty of dialogue, even though a lot of it is repeated, obviously due to the fact that there's limited voice lines in the game. And even as a child, I thought they were a bit risque. He often makes vaguely sexual remarks towards Juanita, who just tends to brush him off, but with how weirdly persistent he is with the repeated lines, he tends to come across as a little bit weird. Still, absolutely love the game though. Deadlocked is easy a top 3 Ratchet game for me. This entry really just refers to the absolute ridiculousness and absurdity of the ghost zombies in Ratchet Deadlocked. They're absolutely awesome, but I just think it's so absurd, the levels they sort of go to. I know it's not really specified in the lore, but when you think about it, it is kind of mad. The robot zombies are first introduced in Ratchet Deadlocked on the planet Catacrom 4, which is the first actual planet you go to, and would show up a couple of times in other Dread Zone challenges and on planet Torval, before finally being seen in the final boss fight, but before that, they would be used in the stage The Ghost Station, which was the final planetary stage that you would see in the game. The fact that ghost zombies exist means that they were originally killed, turned into zombies, killed again by us presumably, turned into ghost zombies, and they are then seen in sort of liquid containers being prepared to go again. So they are killed again, and then resurrected, and after the ghost station is destroyed and they're seen in the final boss battle, they are shown again, which means that they are possibly there just to be resurrected and killed for a 4th time, which it just blows my mind when I think about that, because of how funny that is to me. Now, I'm sorry if this looks different from the rest of the video, but I accidentally forgot to film this earlier, so I'm having to do this now while I'm midway through editing. But, you know, it's fine, you know, we'll make it work. Focus 344 is a very early demo for Ratchet & Clank 3 Up Your Arsenal, which was used with focus groups, hence the name. This version was a very cut down version from the final game, with some features and cut content that the final release never actually saw. That's why it's very well documented on YouTube, with several videos going over collectibles being missing, some leftover mechanics from Ratchet & Clank GC, such as the levitator being present, but, you know, I saw one that had this interesting claw mechanic animation in the Starship Phoenix that was cut, and it's interesting to see the difference between playable versions, as I said with the Gold Bolts Hurt Ratchet entry. So you can really change your perception of how you view a game when you see things that were originally meant to be there, but obviously not. We are now at the abyss. No light reaches this far down, and we are plunged into darkness. There is no way back from here. Only the most strange and obscure stuff from here on in. Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, and Helga. And let's get straight into the final tier. In the Ratchet & Clank 2016 reboot, there is a cutscene on Kerwan, once the pair are recruited into the Galactic Rangers, which shows Alaris, one of the members of said Galactic Rangers, playing Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal in the first-person mode. She is shown using the shot cannon against some Tyrannoids on a planet I can't quite make out, but it looks a little bit like Rilgar, and this means that Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal is canon to the Ratchet & Clank 2016 universe. While I believe that the remake is not canon to the main games, it's interesting to show how this sort of thing can overlap.
clear to attack Drek Industries in 3 days. That means you two are getting the accelerated course.
Ha! That's right, lives at home 472. What's the matter? Don't like getting your butt kicked?
Hey, Lars.
I'm sorry, the title for this entry just makes me laugh every time I see it. A couple of things throughout the series indicate that Courtney Gears, the obvious rip on Britney Spears, was involved in one or several sex tapes. In Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, a cutscene is shown after a boss fight on planet Dax, that is one of my favourite cutscenes in the entire franchise, by the way.
Check it out. Looks like somebody's a big fan of Courtney Gears.
Courtney who?
Come on, remember that bombshell handing out prizes on Annihilation Nation?
Ah, yes. Her specifications were remarkable.
Yeah, well, she's not the hottest pop star in the galaxy because of her singing.
That is odd. It appears this computer was recently used to edit one of her music videos.
Oh, let's watch it! I mean, you know, it may contain a clue or something.
Miss Gears may be in league with Dr. Nefarious.
Yeah, who knew? She always seems so sweet and innocent in her videos. Well, except for that one with the... You know...
She might possess information about what Nefarious...
The poses and things Ratchet does to sort of indicate what he's talking about definitely show that she was involved in coital activities with one or several people. Every time I think of this, it just surprises me to think that this children's game houses a universe in which both porn and swearing are both canon and referenced several times. It's just mental to me. In the Japanese version of Ratchet Deadlocked, whenever Ratchet would upgrade his armor, there would be really detailed cutscenes that have like a high intensity feel to them that would display the differences, and they were extremely badass. How cool are they? It really makes me wish that something like this and this over the top would have been present for the Western releases of this game. But unfortunately, we get left out. Ratchet Deadlocked was originally supposed to be a racing game set in the Ratchet & Clank universe, obviously. This game would have been something akin to Jak X Combat Racing, but was quickly cancelled and reworked into the game we have now to prevent competition with Naughty Dog's release of the aforementioned Jak X. I think we have it better now though. A Ratchet racing game would have been a cool concept, but I think the whole Gladiator Arena Fighter game works a lot better for a character of his caliber. Again, the title of this one is just absolutely mental to me. After the final boss fight with the Protopet in Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, a cutscene is shown where Captain Quark is being punished for deliberately interfering with the prized product of a megacorp, literally called Megacorp, as mentioned earlier, which is fucking stupid by the way, might I add, but also for sabotaging our hero's mission. This cutscene is fairly infamous among the fans of the series, as it ends with an industrial level crotchetizer with a claw heading directly for his crotch, which would make sense. It then cuts to his face with him screaming, and this is just a mental cutscene, as a mega corporation kept this man for experiments and then performed painful cock and ball torture on him. Absolutely mental cutscene in my opinion, and one of the best in the series, hands down.
All right, fellas, nice and tight now. So you tested this, right? Oh, wait, that's why I'm here. Oh, one more thing.
There's no really way to sort of dodge the bullet with this one, so I'm just going to jump right in. Ratchet & Clank The Odd Couple was a previously lost Flash game as a part of the press kit for the original release, so like, what, 2001, 2? So very, very long ago. It was a point-and-click game with a sort of 50s American, or 50s, 60s American sitcom setting, complete with the laugh track and everything. This game, as far as I'm aware, had absolutely fuck all to do with the Ratchet and Clank story, other than, obviously, the characters involved, bar one, which we will get to. This is quite possibly the single most strange thing that I have ever seen that is Ratchet and Clank related. There is a reason why it is the last entry on the final tier of this Iceberg. There's a weird section where Clank's face goes red as his non-existent trousers fall down. There's another section in which Quark is fucking tied up in a cupboard and ball gagged.
Better not let Ratchet see this one.
I don't know why. I don't know how that relates to anything, but he is. But it doesn't make any sense. The icing on the cake, though. We haven't even touched on the best bit in this entire shitty little Flash game. Ratchet at some point makes a phone call to a specific someone, and you will never get, you know what, actually? I'm going to put up 3 options on screen right now. One of which is going to include who he calls up. Just take a guess out of which one, or which 3, out of the 3, that he calls up. Just take a wild guess. You guessed? You finished? Right. I'll tell you, the answer's D. There's none of the fucking above. I know I said it would be, but he calls up Darth fucking Vader.
Hello?
Ratchet converses with Darth Vader. Darth fucking Vader. I don't know why or how, but Insomniac unironically licensed the character Darth Vader for this one bit. And that just blows my mind. I have no idea why, but I am so glad they did. It is stupidly hilarious. The humour's very sort of lowbrow and whatever, but it's just the absurdity of seeing these characters in that setting. If you haven't seen the full playthrough, then I'm going to leave a link to it in the description. It's one of the craziest things I've seen with regard to this series, and will probably remain that way for the remainder of my laughably short life. It is mental. It has been a really enjoyable experience doing this Iceberg, to be honest. I knew I would sort of enjoy doing it, but there has been a lot of work put into it. At the point of currently recording these bits, it has been 2 days since I started working on this video. I've probably got another day to sort of gather all the stuff for the editing and then actually edit it. So this is going to be one of my most, one of my biggest videos sort of effort-wise and time-wise. So I really hope you guys enjoyed, because I know for a fact I've thoroughly enjoyed doing this. You know, I just wanted to go on for a little bit, you know, go on not a rant per se, but just sort of say that I love this franchise and its games. These games mean so much to me. I feel like most sort of hardcore game players or gamers, I don't really like using that word because it's fucking awful, have that one game or that one series that always means so much to them, that they can always just come back to and jump in. They know loads about it, and it always sort of lifted them up when they were in bad spirits. And this is that game series for me. I adore these games. And like I say, I've been playing these since I was, 5? So that's 18 years. 18 years I've been playing this game. And, I mean, they've brought me immeasurable joy since the first time I played them, since I played them on my phone 2 days ago. Like, it's insane just how influential these games have been to me and my tastes in the entire industry. The fact that I've been playing these for 18 years is just insane to me, and I suppose that this video is just kind of a homage for my love of the series, because, you know, I feel like I deserve to not really pay back, because I can't really pay back, but show my respects to something that has And I know this is going to sound sappy, but always really been there for me to just sort of play and enjoy. And so I urge you again, for the love of God, if you have never played these games, please do. Pick up a cheap PS3 or PS2, get a cheap copy, or hell, emulate them on your phone. Phones are powerful enough to do that with PS2 emulators now. Like, you can't really buy them anymore, so it makes sense. Or get them on PlayStation Plus. That's a good option. They're on PlayStation Plus at the moment. Like the entire sort of, I want to say some of the Future trilogy and all the original quadrilogy. So please, I urge you to give them a go. These games have helped me through a lot of rough years of my life, and for that, I cannot thank the developers at Insomniac Games enough for this masterpiece of a series and all the extras they have created. The lore is insane, the characters are funny, they're grounded, like everything just feels really nice to like experience. In the rare case that one of them sees this, I doubt it, but I hope they feel proud knowing that they have probably saved my life more times than I can count. As I say, they have got me through a lot of shitty experiences in my life, and I can only thank them for that. A lot of my happy memories of my childhood involve this series in some way, shape or form, so for that, again, I thank them. And both people that watch this, and former and current and future devs of the Ratchet & Clank series, thank you. Thank you for sticking with me through this video. Like and for them to keep making these games, you know. So yeah, that's enough going on, but I feel like I had to say that. On a more cheery note, however, if you enjoyed this video, then please give me a like or subscribe. It helps me more than you could ever know. Only if you enjoyed this style. I'm not sort of begging you to do it otherwise, but even if you just watched, thank you. Hopefully I can make another video as big as this one at some point again in the future, so yeah, thanks again. Bye-bye, guys.